Hello and welcome to podcast number 23 from the Self-Publishing Formula.
Two writers, one just starting out, the other a bestseller. Join James Blatch and Mark Dawson and their amazing guests as they discuss how you can make a living telling stories. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Hello and welcome along to, we're in midsummer here in the Northern Hemisphere. I guess you're midwinter in the south, but summer's coming and the opposite of Game of Thrones. And shall we say hello to anyone in the tropics, Mark, in the middle bit?
Do you know anyone in the tropics, James?
Well, I think there are plenty of people in Queensland probably listening to this, and who
That's
knows, through Central Africa. Anyway, seasons greetings in the world where there's no seasons. We'll stop rambling and start focusing now. Actually, we have a very focused episode today, don't we? Because we're going to talk about writing, which is common to everybody, whatever genre you're doing, whatever your particular shtick is in publishing. The marketing may change, but we all need to write. And it can be, for some people, it comes perhaps more naturally than others. There's no substitute really for, as Adam Croft always said to us in his interview, bum on seat, hand on keyboard. But we've got a great interview today from a woman who's developed a fast writing system and a particular approach to it, which has really worked for her and will get you, she will, in fact, her book, her non-fiction book is 2K to 10K in a day to try and get to 10,000 words a day writing, which obviously would make a massive difference to your writing career. Before we introduce Rachel Aaron as her name, people will know who she is, I'm sure. But let's just talk about your writing, Mark, because obviously you've got successful books behind you. How do you approach it and how many words do you get done? Do you have a word count aim every day?
It depends really. It depends what else is going on. So if I'm kind of doing non-fiction stuff, I'll tend to do that and marketing in the afternoon and kind of devote the mornings to writing. So at the moment, if I can get a couple of thousand words a day done, I consider that to be a pretty good day. It's a little less than I managed previously. In fact, it's less than I managed when I was still working full time. But it's just, I don't remember whose law this is, but there is a law that says that work will expand to fill the space available. Yeah. And that's something that's certainly something that I've found. The more time I have, the more things I have to do. And as long as 2,000 is enough, you look at a 70,000 word, 80,000 word novel, and you're probably going to be able to do that in 6 weeks. So maybe even in, say, a couple of months, you can get plenty of novels published. If you can hit 2,000 a day, no problem.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, you and I have both had to really focus on time management since we've been running a couple of different ventures. And you're right, it's like a bin in a kitchen, isn't it? You just fill it up and you get another bin next to it and that will fill up as well. So you do need to be aware that you need to be proactive about what's going in the bin and how you're spending your time. That's part of it, but Rachel has a particular approach to actual writing. I think it's really interesting, but she's a great writer in her own right, so to speak. She's straddles a couple of genres, actually, science fiction and what you might call romance, but she has this dragon series where the dragons are human. Seems quite Japanese influence to me, but very successful in their own area. And I think another thing to take away from this interview and from Rachel Aaron's experience and success is that you don't have to panic about having a niche genre. She's very successful in an area that really is not a very wide genre. You can call it romance if you want, but she herself points out in the interview she's not really a romance author. Yeah, so take heart if you do think that your books don't have that wide appeal. There is definitely a market and an audience for you. So without further ado, let's have a listen to what Rachel has to say. So Rachel Aaron is the best-selling author of separate fantasy and science fiction series. The books include the Heartstriker series, that's Nice Dragons finished last. I noticed the latest, The Legend of Eli Monpress, and Heaven's Queen, which is the final instalment in the Paradox trilogy. But many of you will know her as, in the author community at least, for her non-fiction books, especially 2,000 to 10,000, a book helpfully subtitled How to Write Faster, Write Better, and Write More of What You Love, which sounds like a really good thing for us to talk about, Rachel. Welcome to the SPF podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a great pleasure to have you. So let's talk a little bit about your books to start off with and a bit about you. You're over there in the States, we should say, first of all.
I am native of Georgia, which, as I used to tell people when I visited the UK, is north of Disneyland. North of Disney World, actually, by about, a couple 100 miles, but,
it's
same basic area.
I always say I'm near London because, everywhere in the UK is near London and everywhere in America is north of Disney World. Apart from, but I suppose if you're in Hawaii.
Yes, if you're in Hawaii, you can just say Hawaii and then everyone knows.
Yeah. But there you are. You're in Georgia and you've got a couple of series going. I think you've just come to the end of your science fiction trilogy, but it's more of, is it urban fantasy? Is that how you describe the Dragon series?
Yeah, well, I started in epic fantasy with The Legend of Eli Press, which is 5 books, and they are traditionally published by Orbit, both in the US and the UK, and in Australia and other places.
Excellent.
And then I switched to Rachel Bach and wrote science fiction, which was my epic fantasy was not a romance at all. It was really kind of a throwback to that kind of 90s David Eddings fantasy, but with a modern pacing. So it's kind of exciting and fast. It's not plodding, but it's still wizards and spirits and giant larger than life set pieces. My science fiction is much more of a kind of a military sci-fi romance because I love guns and kissing. So I wanted to put them together. And that's written as Rachel Bach. And my latest series, I'm back to Rachel Aaron, and I tried self-publishing, and there are 2 books out, and that's the Heartstriker series. And the first one is called Nice Dragons Finish Last. And the second one is called One Good Dragon Deserves Another. And the third, which I actually just finished editing and will be out in August, is called No Good Dragon Goes Unpunished. And that series, which again, self-published, has been doing amazingly. I actually won the RT Editor's Choice Award for One Good Dragon Deserves Another, which was a giant shock to me because, I'm not really a romance author. There's a love story in the book, but they're not romance. And 2, this is a very prestigious romance industry award for, a little self-published book that's just me. So I was extremely excited. I was up on a stage with a whole bunch of really famous people getting an award. It's beautiful. It's on my shelf. I love it.
Well, that is great. Yeah, and you
super exciting.
Yeah, with romance, you choose a pretty crowded sector as well. To stand out and pick up awards in that is truly awesome.
Oh yes. Well, I was blown away, and I'm actually a very big fan of Romantic Times magazine, the magazine that does it. I think they are a lot of traditional publishing has had their head in the dirt about the changes that are going through our industry, but the romance sector has always been right there on the cutting edge. And Romantic Times, the magazine, is part of that. Also, the romance publishers. And I went to actually the RT convention, which is where the award ceremony was. And we've been talking about it a great deal on my blog, which, by the way, rachelaaron.net is my website. I run a blog there with my husband, who actually does a lot of my marketing. We're a pair. He works for me now. We both do this publishing thing full time. We went there together and we learned just so much about what's new in marketing and publication and what's coming down the line and what the trends are. It was amazing. I absolutely recommend going to Romantic Times convention because, again, romance, they get it. It's not like, it's so funny because I go back to science fiction and fantasy, which is my genre. That's where I am. It's like going back 20 years in the past. I'm like, guys, it's time to move forward and embrace the change.
Yeah.
And learn how we can all make a great deal of money from it. But no, apparently they don't like money. I don't know.
Yeah. Not everyone seems to wants to buy a ticket to the races, do they, in this? But that's partly what we're doing here in our podcast. There's enough people who do. And I suppose it's kind of good for those people who have made this first step, are deciding to embrace the marketing side of it. It's good for them. Not everyone's onto it just yet, so gives us a bit of space.
Well, it's always kind of fun to be the first out the gate.
Yeah, exactly. And romance, you're absolutely right. Romance, and I would say erotica as well. They're the ones that are really forging ahead. They've really enjoyed self-publishing space, and it's been quite a democratic, enabling system for them, whereas maybe they had, I don't know, snootiness or whatever with the trad industry before. That doesn't exist in the self-publishing world. It's, you want to do it, you do it.
Yeah, and also I think that has a lot to do with the romance readership. Romance readers are very particular. They know what they want, but they are a very loyal group of readers who read voraciously. And they were the first group of consumers to pick up e-readers and really move to ebooks simply because, you meet the average American, for example, reads 12 books a year. The average romance reader will read 100. There were women there who talked about reading 600 books in a year. And I was like, wow, no wonder you went to ebook. If you didn't, your garage would be full within a year. of books, you know.
And which one do you enjoy? Because I get the feeling you love your science fiction, don't you?
I love science fiction. I grew up in a very nerdy household. We watched Babylon 5. I've seen all of Doctor Who. I've watched all of Star Trek. I'm actually more of a Star Trek girl than a Star Wars girl, I think.
That's okay.
Although we're recording on May the 4th, so May the 4th be with you.
Indeed, May the 4th be with you. Yeah, I'm more of a Star Wars and Star Trek, but I've got some good friends on the Star Trek side, so that's okay.
Well, I always loved the hopefulness of Star Trek. I always felt that Star Trek was a wonderfully, at its core, kind of very optimistic and humanist show about sort of the endless determination of the human spirit. I always really liked it.
Yeah, and what I loved about Star Trek is it always hinted at this. They never really explained it, but they hinted at the moving on of civilization. There was occasional references to, well, we don't use money anymore. And we don't need that.
They were utopia, pretty much.
It was a utopia. They never really explained it, and that was the really interesting aspect of Star Trek. That was just taken for granted. A bit like The Culture series by Ian M. Banks is the closest that I'm reading at the moment to that backstory to Star Trek, which was so fascinating. And yeah, I agree. I like. There's a sophistication to Star Trek, which as a complete Star Wars nerd, I will admit is not really there for most of Star Wars. So I'll give you that.
Well, I actually, and I might get some hate for this, but I always felt that Star Wars was more fantasy than science fiction. If you remove the spaceships, it's really kind of almost the story itself is much more of a fantasy type story and a story arc. It's more of a personal journey and less the story of civilizations, which is what I tend to think of as science fiction.
Yeah. Yeah, it's princesses.
And I'm actually a big fan of the kind of the gritty. No, I say I like Star Trek, but my favorite Star Trek was Deep Space Nine. You know, just like I loved Babylon 5, which is all about sort of the personal dramas of these two stations, Deep Space Nine and Babylon 5. Accordingly, I love like kind of I guess like slice of life in space. I don't know. I really like it. I also like military sci-fi. I'm a big fan of get out there and shoot anything that's got more than two legs. So
yeah, well, you do well in Hollywood because that's pretty much the plot of every science fiction film that comes out of Hollywood. So yeah.
I love it. Yeah. I love it so.
Yeah, great. Well, that's a fantastic canon of books behind you, and you're a voracious writer by the looks of things, and that's very much your shtick, I guess, in the author community. You've got a system, which I guess is the system you use, is the one that you preach about in terms of how to organize yourself and get writing.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned in my lovely intro, thank you very much. I'm the author of what I call 2K to 10K, which is basically the 3 steps I use to go from writing about 2,000 words a day in 6 hours to writing over 10,000 words a day in about the same amount of time. And that sounds really incredible. And believe me, at the time, it was a miracle. I felt like I'd cured cancer. I was so excited because I went from traditional publishing, because my first 2 series, again, were with Orbit, which is a division of Hachette. I went from this very kind of slow 6-month deadline world, but the deadlines are very hard. If you missed your deadline, every other part of the publication process would be thrown off. Like, you had your time when you were going to get your cover design. If your book wasn't ready, well, then you lost your slot. You had to wait until there was another slot. So you might, even if you were 2 weeks late, your stuff might be months late, and you lost your slot with your editor and so forth. It would just sort of, you get shuffled on down the line. It was a very, very big deal to miss your deadline. And so I got myself in a position where I was right up against the deadline and I had to get this book done. And I was like, if I didn't get this book done, it was going to be bad. It all kind of came about because I had one of those scenes where you're in the scene and nothing is working and you're banging your head against the scene and you don't know what's going to happen. The whole thing's just a mess. And I'd worked on it for 5 hours. It had to be, I think it was days. I think it was days that I'd worked on this stupid scene. One conversation, right? And so I just finally got so frustrated. I just closed my laptop and I got out my notebook and I just wrote down what I wanted to say. I didn't bother with the right language. I didn't bother with descriptions. I just did it like a transcript for a conversation. And I sat there until I figured it out. And it took me probably about maybe 20 minutes of kind of just writing in the notebook. And then I figured it out. And once I figured that out, I was able to go back and write that whole scene in 30 minutes. And that was sort of the beginning. That was the aha moment, is that if you know what you're writing before you write it, you will write it at least 2 times faster.
That's the key. But
that's the $1 million secret right there.
Yeah. So, I have bought the book I should tell you, as soon as we got you on our list, I started doing my research, and I couldn't. I mean, for me, writing a book for the first time, and I do struggle. I haven't written today for no good reason.
Bad.
There's no
Very
good
bad.
reason. And well,
I want you to know I am deeply personally disappointed in you.
Yeah, thank you. That will help. So, yeah, I mean, but I know that, funnily enough, you sort of describe it. I've got this scene, I've got to this point, and I don't really know what I'm going to be doing in it. And it's enough of a subconscious block for me to do other things than turn to the book. So there's different, I mean, if we talk about these seat of the pants writing, panzers or whatever, and structuralists, but there's got to be, I wonder, I don't ever want to be somebody who sits out and, I mean, some people do, they'll fill out 20 pages describing their book before they start writing it, particularly if people work in teams. I don't think I could do that, but I am drawn to the idea of writing down, even if it's bullet points, what your scene is, which is going to make it easier then, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think that everybody writes in their own way. Writing is very personal. I've never met two authors who have described the writing process in the same way. I really do think it's sort of a wheel everyone has to invent for themselves. That said, there are definitely some best practices you can follow, especially if you find yourself getting into trouble. For example, if you have days where you find yourself not writing, that's often a sign that something is maybe a little wrong with your book. Maybe you're not excited about your book as you should be, because writing should be the most fun thing you do every day. Like, I'm a firm believer of, if you don't love it, you're doing it wrong. Because if you think about writing is pure creativity. It's telling your story, this thing you love, and sitting down to do it should be the high point of your day. And if it's not, you need to ask yourself, why not? Why am I not excited about what I'm supposed to write today? And that's actually another one of my points, because, okay, so once I discovered that things went faster, if I wrote them down, I started every day before I would write a scene, I would take 5 minutes and I would just write on my notebook what was going to happen in this scene. And it could be something as simple as Marcy talks to Julius. What do they say? Marcy and Julius are two characters in the series I'm writing right now. And I would just write it out like a transcript, what they said. I didn't worry about details. I just wrote down what I wanted to say. And if I found the conversation was kind of going south, I could just exit out and start over again. And rather than losing 300 words, I would just jump back up the page. And when it was done, I'd have this beautiful little kind of like a sketch, like I was sketching for a painting of what the scene would be. And then when I sat down to write the scene, all the hard work, all that kind of back and forth thinking and what am I going to say was pretty much already done. And so I was able to just kind of get the scene out very, very quickly. And this was the number one thing that doubled my word count. But from that point, I then discovered that there were days when I wrote enormously more than other days. And I was like, why? I'm doing the same process. Why are some days better than other days? Because I'm scientifically minded. And I was also kind of keeping track of how much I was writing at this point, because I was trying to figure out, how can I get better? And I talk about all of this, by the way, on the blog. If you go to rachelaaron.net and click on my blog, on the sidebar, there's a thing called How I Went from 2,000 Words a Day to 10,000 Words a Day, which was the original blog post. And everything I'm saying is written down there. So you don't have to worry about taking notes. It's all down there. And it's all in the book, which is only 99 cents, even less in pence. So It's great. But anyway, the next kind of thing I had to figure out was why some days are better than others. And the answer to that turned out to be, I wrote more words on the days where I was excited about what I was writing, which is, again, kind of head smackingly obvious. Yeah. Of course you write more when you're excited, but that has a dark side to it. That implies the days where I'm not excited about writing are what is wrong with those scenes? I don't want boring scenes in my book. If I'm not excited about it, no one's going to be. This is my baby. So that encouraged me to start asking myself, how can I make this cooler? Where are the rock star moments in this scene? If it's just a humdrum little scene to move the book forward, that's no fun for anyone. Why do we want that? And so if the first step is know what you're going to write before you write it, the next step is enthusiasm. Being excited about what you're going to write before you write it. And so now what I do to make myself go even faster is, when I'm doing that 5 minutes where I'm just sort of sketching out what I'm going to write, I ask myself, what's exciting about this scene? What am I excited to write here? What is happening that is cool? And then I get myself pumped. I get myself pumped up about that. And so by the time I'm ready to write, not only do I know what I'm going to do, I'm very excited about it. And obviously, I'm a plotter. I plot in advance, but I don't see why you couldn't do this as a pantser. If you may get to a scene and not know what's going to happen, but you can still discover that not in the writing, because the whole point of this kind of method is to not discover things while you're writing, because that is the most time consuming and wasteful way to do it. If I make a mistake when I'm writing and I realize that this whole conversation's been going the wrong direction, I have to lose sometimes 500, sometimes 1,000 otherwise perfectly good words just because they're going the wrong direction.
Yeah.
But if I know I'm going the wrong direction before I write those words, it is so much easier to just X out a paragraph I wrote on paper than to X out the 5 paragraphs that describes in my novel. So that's really what my system does. This isn't some cheat. This isn't being a hack. And I hate it when people are like, oh, you write fast, you must throw away half the words you write. I'm going to be a bitch, please. If I did that, what would be the point if I threw away half the words I wrote? I do this for a living. I don't have time to waste on that crap. Ain't no one got time for that. It's ridiculous. I get good words. And I've often found that the faster I go, the better the words are, because I know exactly where I'm going. It's less like writing and more like I'm actually reading the book as I produce it. And that is just the most amazing feeling in the world. I mean, it feels like you're flying. When that happens, a story just picks you up and takes you away. It really is kind of magical.
Yeah.
It's that magic of creation thing. It's wonderful.
Yeah, well, that's great. And I can certainly reflect that. The parts of the story, and the first, actually, once I broke kind of at 10,000 words to 30,000 words, I really knew what I was. It just came together after 10,000 words, and those next 20,000 words I did in a few days. I mean, I did do really quickly, and now I need to engineer that situation again. You're absolutely right, and get excited about it.
Even if you right before you go to bed, I haven't written today. Just get out a notebook or any paper or your laptop or whatever you use to jot things down quickly. Your phone or whatever. And write what you're going to, just make notes about what you're going to write the next day. Get yourself excited. Try to get yourself pumped about it. Remind yourself why you're doing this. And not just because I want to publish a book, but why are you telling the story? And when you get yourself excited about your own work, writing becomes that much easier.
And what I find interesting about this, I think a lot of pantsers think that they are doing it quickly. They think the reason that they can't be bothered to slow the process down, and they just want to crack out and crack on with the book, and they can then, get an edit and a redraft done. But what you're really saying is actually that's a false economy, and that a little bit of planning is going to make you go 3 or 4 times faster.
I absolutely believe that. It's that whole, a pint of sweat saves a gallon of blood kind of thing. A little bit of work now will save you enormous pain later, because it's always easier to fix things before you write them. That said, however, I fully respect people who write as pantsers, people who enjoy writing the paragraph and then learning through the paragraph that that's not how they were supposed to go. And they learn something about their characters through the failure. And that is definitely a valid method of writing. It's not my method. I am a plotter to the nth degree. I like to think of myself as a story architect. I plan everything out, all the arcs, all the ways things change. I plan it all because I like to know where I'm going. If I don't know where I'm going, I get kind of paralyzed and I can't move. But that's just me. Everyone's different. So if you're a pantser, please don't think I'm talking down to you. I'm really not. You do something I can't do, and I respect that.
The other thing is the writing you end up with, when you've done your scribbling in your notebook, you know what you're going to do, you're excited about it, and you get going. Does that have an impact on how completed the writing is? Or are you still looking at this as being pressing on and writing as you want and then worry about polishing later?
I would definitely say it is more polished than it used to be when I just figured stuff out in the text. But it is not yet as polished as it will be after a good edit. My kind of rule is that the first draft is the draft you write to learn how to write the book. And then your edit is when you actually write it. But that said, planning things ahead, I think definitely kind of skips a little step. I used to just write everything out, and then it would be a giant mess. And then I would go through and I'd do all this stuff and I'd fix it. And it was this giant editorial process. Now, as in I just finished my 13th book. And for this novel, I plotted the whole thing. I wrote it. I realized I had the plot wrong. I rearranged all the pieces. I finished it. And then I went back and I edited the big parts I knew were wrong. And once I did all the big edits, I went back to the beginning. I edited the whole thing through. And now it's pretty much done. I'm very, very happy with it. It's going to it's with my husband who's editing it right now. And it's going to the actual editor on the 13th. But I don't foresee any major changes at all. I mean, everything's going to be very minor because the book is pretty much done. It's exactly what I want.
Yeah.
And that was only a total of about 3 passes. Once to write it, kind of one in the middle where I fixed all the big parts, and then a final pass. So maybe 2.5.
Yeah.
But that's really good. I mean, that's really short for a book that's 187,000 words. Oh my God.
Oh, that's a lot of words.
It is the second longest book I've ever written. The first longest book I've ever written actually never was published. It was my very first novel, which was 220,000 words.
Whew.
So yeah, that was quite the first novel. It was a YA fantasy too. Let me tell you how much that got rejected. A lot by everyone.
Well, in the self-publishing era, that is, that's a couple of series there. Just that one novel, yeah.
I am a weird self-published author. Maybe because I came from traditional, but I like big books, and I cannot lie. Yeah. I like to write them long.
We'll just finish off on the writing. I think it's fascinating, and I'm really interested in it as well. In fact, one of the things I've had to do, because I come from a news journalism background, and I wrote for broadcasting, which had 2 downsides. One downside was that we wrote really frugally. So my average TV news report would have about 45 seconds of speech in it. So
you must be good at Twitter then.
Yeah, I'm good at Twitter. I'm fine. I can condense stories. I can go to a complicated story involving politicians and unions and you know what, and then have 45 seconds that explains the story, has a middle, beginning and end. I can do that. That turns out to be really rubbish skill for novel writing, where you want to enjoy the journey more.
I don't know. It kind of depends on the story you're telling. I'm actually a giant fan of George Orwell, who was also a reporter. And I actually really love his sparse reporter style in the fiction because it makes it feel more real. And a little tip of my English major hat there.
Well, I love Orwell. I mean, if I could write a book, I can read his books today and do read his books today. But that was one thing.
They're lovely.
The other thing is that obviously in a newsroom, for a decade, you're beaten over the head if you make if a small mistake gets through to on air or anywhere near on air, you're in trouble. So it's drummed into you through brutal episodes early on. And I find it very difficult to write something that I know has got mistakes in it, is not quite right. And for that reason, it's actually taken me a long time to work out, do you know what? I'm going to read this again and go through it at a later date and make it better. But that's totally alien to me, but I've had to really learn that. And I'm not sure how many other people who come to writing for the first time understand that there is this intermediate process. And the editing, I've loved the editing side of it. And you're absolutely right. That's where the story happened for me. I mean, I wrote 80,000 words of this book and then started again. And now I'm writing it, and that's the editing stage. It's completely described my experience, but it was weird for me to try and write something that I'm going to get hit for by someone.
I think what you're describing is a very common phenomenon. I actually experienced it myself because I am a perfectionist. I hate it knowing that things are wrong. It just bothers me. I can't let it go. And what I finally ended up doing was that I have a rule, which is that no one has to see it. No one will see this until I give the okay. And I just keep telling myself that it's okay. No one has to see it. I make myself giant notes inside the text so that I know it's not going to go out because it has this giant note in it. And so therefore no one's going to see it but me. This is all just for me.
Yep.
And I do all these things to remind myself that this is not a final version, that it is okay to make mistakes and have stuff be out. And it's really just, you have to get used to it. You have to kind of ease yourself into like it's like easing yourself into hot water. You just got to kind of get used to the idea that it is okay to make mistakes, to not know things. Because one of the ways you will murder a book, and I have murdered several, is going back and editing like the first 2 chapters over and over and over again rather than finishing, because that will kill your momentum. Writing is daily practice and creativity and excitement, but it is also momentum. My favorite saying is that writing begets writing. The more you write, the more you want to write. And the faster you go, the faster you want to go, and the better the story flows. I actually read a very good fast writing book by Chris Fox, which I think it's called 5,000 Words Per Hour, which I have never hit, ever.
That's ambitious.
But it's crazy. But the way he does it is that it blows my mind. His method is that he refuses to hit backspace. He writes for a set period of, I don't remember how long he writes, like an hour or something. So and he'll just write, and he's not allowed to hit backspace.
Even typos?
No, nothing.
Okay.
He just keeps going because he's never allowed to look back.
I thought I'd struggle with that. I think you probably would as well.
I can't do it. I don't know how he does it, but I absolutely believe that he is going a million miles an hour. And I've tried, and I've actually implemented a little of that where I just like, I know it's wrong, make a note, I'll fix it later, move on. And I especially had to do that with the second book in my self-published series, which was the biggest bear I've ever had to write. I've never struggled with any book like I struggled with that one, which is weird because it's everyone's favorite book and it's the one that won all the awards. So apparently I pulled it off.
Yeah.
But I hated that book for so long. And but there were times that I'm like, this is so wrong and I don't know how to fix it, but I'm just going to move on, because if I keep banging my head against this wall, I'm going to hate this book and never finish it. And that's, I think, especially true for writers like you at the very beginning, because just finishing that book, a lot of the problems that seemed insurmountable in the middle will be crystal clear to you by the time you reach the end. So there's no point in investing all that energy trying to solve them if you can at all move ahead. It is always better to move ahead than to fix things behind you. Because by the time you reach the end, the things you were worried about fixing might not even be problems anymore. You might have decided to go a totally different route.
So that's a natural procedure. Yeah, that's really, really interesting. I'm lapping this up, Rachel. Thank you.
I hope it's helpful.
Yeah, well, I haven't read the book yet, so I'm going to get that on top of it. So just to round up the writing side, because I want to move on to marketing and a couple of other things in a moment. But yeah, the book is from 2K to 10K, and yeah, it's on Amazon.co.uk and Amazon.com. So about £1, about $1. So really good.
It's a very short, very fast book.
Okay.
It's about 30,000 words, actually, which I think makes it the shortest thing I've ever written.
Yeah. a novel for other people, but for you, a pamphlet. Okay.
When I was at Orbit, they asked me to write a short story, and I gave them a 40,000 word novella, and they never asked me for a short story again.
Well, let's talk a bit about the trad publishing and self-publishing then. So the transition for you, what motivated it, and where are you now in terms of how you see your future?
Oh, well, the motivation was half simple, half complex. The simple part was money. Plain out, the self-publishing pays 4 times better than trad publishing, just straight out. I make 4 times as much on a book that costs half as much. So you can't beat that math. And I have to do a lot more work myself, but that's a one-time investment. I do the work and then it's done. And then the book makes me money forever, versus giving up 90 to 95% of my income for my life plus 70 years. You know, because nothing goes out of print anymore since it's all in digital. You never get your rights back. And that is definitely not worth the advance in my mind. And so that was a big, big factor of why I jumped, because, you know, I am in this to make money. I've got a house and a kid and a husband to support, 2 cars, all that kind of stuff. The American dream. But the other part of it, which was very, very important to me, actually almost more important than the money, was because the book I wanted to write, which was Nice Dragons Finished Last, the first in my Heartsucker series, it's a very weird book. It's about dragons in Detroit. And it is urban fantasy, but also kind of sci-fi and kind of post-apocalyptic. And there are definitely fantasy elements, but also near future elements. And there are spirits and dragons and mages, and the whole thing is a giant political drama. It's an odd little beast. And one of the problems that I have always had is that I kind of write these books that straddle genres. My Paradox trilogy, my sci-fi books, they were sci-fi and romance. My Eli novels were epic fantasy that was lighthearted and moved at a very fast, snappy urban fantasy pace. They actually are much more like an anime or manga or something like that, like a comic book, than they are like any of the grimdark tomes that are very popular right now. It's this very weird fantasy. So everything I've written hasn't neatly fit on a shelf. And that has always been one of my problems, because when you're traditionally published, you have to fit on a shelf. They have to be able to tell that bookstore buyer where you belong. And I didn't really belong anywhere. But in self-publishing, so long as you can fit into 7 categories, you're good, you know?
Yeah.
And I've had enormous success with Nice Dragons Finished Last, in part because it's so different. And people have said, I thought I'd read every urban fantasy there was. I thought the genre was dead. And then Rachel Aaron came along and did something totally new. And that's like one of the best compliments I've ever been paid, because I love urban fantasy and I've read a lot of it. And I also got kind of bored with it. And so I wanted to write something that's new. And my books are like Shadowrun meets dragon drama. It's bizarre, you know?
We often get asked, in fact, this week, we had a note on our Facebook page from somebody saying that they thought their books were too niche and that they would struggle to find their audience. And they write in, I think, lesbian, erotica. It was 2 or 3 subclauses to that for what type of genre it was. But actually, she's had great success because of the targeting she's been doing on social media. And here you are saying, don't panic about that. In fact, I think you've done a blog this week on this subject, haven't you, about niche?
We did. My husband, Travis, who, by the way, has thrown himself into this self-publishing, doing research on self-publishing, and has become, I would say, even much more knowledgeable than I ever was. You guys should actually have him on here. He's the one who knows all this stuff. I'm just parroting what he has researched and looked up. When we went to Romantic Times, he hit, I think, 15 marketing panels. It was ridiculous. The man is a machine. But he wrote this absolutely amazing, and I don't say that as his wife, I say that as an author, an absolutely amazing post about branding yourself and one about how to reach a niche audience, which is something a lot of indie authors, I feel, struggle with, because a lot of authors go indie because their books were just too niche for New York to care about. Because New York doesn't care if you're only going to sell 10,000 books, but, you know, in self-publishing, you sell 10,000 books, that can be like $40,000, you know, at the right price point. So that's not chump change.
No.
That's definitely an audience worth having. And New York didn't even want to bother. So we'll just happily take the money, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
But anyway, yes, it's on the blog, rachelaaron.net. Just click blog. It's right there.
Yeah. How to read niche audiences.
Shout out.
May the 2nd is the date of that publication. Because as I speak now, I'm not sure when this is going to be broadcast, but people will be able to find it on there. In fact, your blog is excellent and very focused.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think it's really good, and it's I can see Travis gets his name in there quite a lot, which is good. So you're not.
Well, we've really been trying to bring him into the blog more. One, because I just don't have time to write 2 blog posts a week. I've got to write these books. And 2, because he really does know an enormous amount. And he keeps giving me these great blog ideas. And I'm like, I don't have time to write this blog. Why don't you write it? You're brilliant. Do this, because he was a better storyteller than I was when we met. He has been this is going to be hilarious, but he was a GM. You know, he was a game master. He ran tabletop role playing, you know, for years, and I'd never even heard of it until college. And I came in and I, started dating him, and we started role playing together, and I loved it. But he'd been doing this since middle school, so he had these amazing stories that he'd been telling, and he actually helped me a lot with my early novels. He's always been one of he's always been my first editor, and just really fantastically great. He's going to blush like crazy when he hears this. He's way too modest, but he's awesome.
Where are his books?
Well, he's actually just finished his first novel. I kept going because he kept having these amazing stories, and he wanted to make games out of them. And I'm like, no, games don't make money. Make a novel. and he finally did. I am very, very hopeful. He hasn't let me read it yet, but we will see.
There's got to be
I bet it's going to be good.
There's got to be a story about a GM that creates a universe and ends up in it. Surely. It's
actually, I think so. I don't think it's quite that, but it is a trapped in a video game type thing. Yeah. But it's great. It's kind of like Sword Art Online. If you've ever, I don't know if you watch any anime. That's awesome. When
you say trapped in a video game, I'm just thinking Tron at this stage, but I'm sure there's
not
others.
that. That's awful.
Yeah. What?
Oh well.
Oh, we may have to disagree on that one.
We may have just lost an audience. We may have just lost half the audience.
I love my Tron.
I was never a really big fan of Tron.
Oh, well, you're not? Okay. Okay. I think it was an age thing. It was bad at the time, but I was young, so it looked great. Anyway, let's press on. We've got a couple more minutes. I want to go very much past 40 minutes for you. So you look forward in terms of self-publishing. You've really got to grips with this. Is something you've thrown yourself into. The trad.
Oh yes.
But the trad deals are still there with you. You're still trad publishing.
Oh yes, I actually have. I have a couple of trad contract writing deals where I've contracted to write books for them that are not really kind of within my own sphere that I can't talk about yet, but we'll hopefully be talking about soon as I can sign these stupid contracts. All of this is not to trash talk trad. I actually loved being trad. I especially loved the editorial help I got. I've had some good editors that I've hired, but I am the writer I am because of my agent and my editors at Orbit. They were the ones, because here's the thing, when you're indie, you are the one hiring the editor, which means if the editor says something you don't like, you can fire them or you can ignore it. But when you are traditionally published, your editor is your boss. They're the one doing the hiring. And so if they tell you to do something, you just have to figure out how to do it. And you can argue your case, and sometimes you win. But generally speaking, if your editor says, I hate this, fix it, you've just got to fix it. And that kind of ironclad, just, make it work moment, that is a very good teacher for being a good writer. And I think one of the reasons that I am as tight a writer as I am, now, because I pride myself on being a pretty meticulous writer, is because I had so many problems that my editor was just like, fix it. I'm not telling you how, you're the author, fix it. And so I fixed it. I made it happen. And but that's not to say, I rolled over or that my editor dictated. My editor actually worked with me a great deal. But there were times, like, for example, in my fourth Eli novel, The Spirit War, that book was about 170,000 words. And my editor was like, this book is too long for mass market paperback. You can't print a book that long in this format. You have to fix it, to cut 40,000 words out and come back to me. And I was like, I can't cut 40,000 words. So I really, really tried. I think I cut maybe 12,000 of editing sentences to be smaller, that kind of thing. And I finally went back to her and I was like, look, I've done my best. I will make you a deal. You tell me what to cut. You read this book, if you tell me to cut something, and I will cut it, and I will not fight you. I will cut it with no questions asked, but you just tell me what to cut to get it down to the right size, and I'll do it. And she couldn't do it. She couldn't cut it because the story was like too locked together. She liked the story too much. And so we ended up going to the trade paper, the bigger format, just because she couldn't do it. That was one of my greatest victory I ever won. I was like, but I don't recommend doing that. It makes your editor very mad.
Well, it's rare as well. That's the dream. And I had this in the news from, obviously, you say to your editor, well, look, I can't do this. It's can't be cut, and they read it and they work out that it can't. But it doesn't happen very often because normally the editors are
normally
good.
You're wrong.
Yeah, normally you're wrong, and that's the whole process of learning that, isn't it?
And that's one thing that I think a lot of indie authors miss by going indie. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't go indie, but you do need to be cognizant of what you are giving up. And one of the things you are giving up is that the editors working at the major publishing houses are the best in the business. They are amazing. They have their jobs for a reason. And they don't have to take your shit, quite frankly. Yeah. And because authors can get an ego, and I've got one too. And, we think we know best. And sometimes we don't. A lot of times we don't. When you are self-publishing, your editor can tell you, I think you need to fix this. And you can say, I think you need to fix your face. Goodbye.
Yeah.
You can't do that in New York. You can't do that in trad. And I think there is a lot of merit to that. And some indie authors will say that's a good part, but I don't know. Artistically speaking, sometimes it's not good to not have someone who can tell you no. So that's why even now with an editor I hire, whatever she says, I have a rule that whatever my editor says, I have to try it at least once. And if I try it and I hate it, then I can say no. But I found that when I try the editor's advice, even if it sounds crazy, if I try it, I will often find that she was actually right.
Yeah, everyone needs an editor, and in the creative process there's always going to be a tension, because when you create, you put yourself into it, and there's some, not just blood, sweat and tears, there's ego that goes into it. You're quite right, and you feel it's difficult not to feel hurt, isn't it? So
writing a novel is the most egotistical thing you can do. You were literally sitting here and writing a giant lie and then asking people to pay money to read it. It is the most hubristic act that we can do. You're like, here is the product of my brain, pay me money. You don't even have to own it. You're just enjoying the experience, So there's a lot of ego. And it's funny because writers are not as flamboyant as other artists. We don't get the red carpet treatment. We don't get the big gallery shows. So I think a lot of writers kind of think that they're not the temperamental, egotistical artists that you see in the stereotypes. But a lot of us are. You go to any writing convention, there are some egos, and that's fine. That's good. You need an ego in this business, because if you don't believe in yourself, no one else is going to. You have to, this is the ultimate fake it till you make it kind of business. But at the same time, you have to be aware of that. You have to be aware of your own shortcomings and be ready to check them when they start running out of control.
Final question, final area. What's working for you right now in self-publishing marketing?
We don't actually do a lot of direct marketing. And the reason for that being that I am extraordinarily lucky and very, very happy to have a very nice fan base that eats up my books. But the way I got that fan base was I wrote good books. I have sort of a very high internal standard of quality. If I don't like a book, it doesn't go out. I don't care if it's late. A book will be late for 6 months, but it'll be bad forever. So I never put out anything I'm not 100% proud of and 100% ready to put my name on. That sometimes means that books come out 6 months late. But that quality has won me an extremely loyal fan base who has followed me to some pretty weird genres, like Nice Dragons Finish Last. The fact that I continuously keep the quality very high and really, really work to make sure that these books are not just, have quality production, meaning they're not full of typos, they've got nice covers and all that kind of stuff. Because my goal with my self-published works was to make them indistinguishable from my New York works. Because most readers, they have no idea if your book is self-published or not unless it looks really bad. They're not there looking at the publisher. They just want the book that looks fun. So if you invest the money and the time into making your book and look like a really beautiful finished product to look professional, then most readers won't even notice you're self-published. They'll just notice you look like a great book for a good price. And that's an instant sell right there. And so for our marketing strategy, and we're doing some Facebook ads and that kind of stuff, but unlike a lot of authors who have these very complicated marketing strategies, our strategy is really to get the book in front of as many eyeballs as possible. And we do that through being in Kindle Unlimited, which has been very successful for us. And just say straight up, get it out there. We are giant Amazon fans. Mm-hmm. Amazon has been very, very good to us. Kindle Unlimited has been cutting their price, but it still is making me way more than I was making when I was in other markets. So for me, for my books, being Amazon exclusive has been very good. I don't know how long we will stay there, but Kindle Unlimited is amazing because it removes the barrier to entry for new people trying your books. And what we have discovered, especially if you work hard to produce a quality product, is that once a person enters sort of the Rachel Aaron matrix, they tend to read all my books.
Like a web.
Yeah, they tend to, they'll start with Heartstrikers and they'll read the next Heartstrikers book and they'll be like, oh no, I'm out of Rachel Aaron books. I'm going to go read her other series. And then they'll go buy Eli or they'll buy Paradox. And so once you get that customer, our goal is to keep that customer for life. At the end of my book, I have a little letter which says, hey, thank you so much for reading. Please leave a review. Sign up for my newsletter. Oh my God, I appreciate you so much. And that letter has gotten me so many reviews and so many newsletter signups because when a reader reaches the end of your book, that is the moment when they are most willing to do anything for you.
Yeah.
That is when they are happiest with you and they want to express their gratitude it's a nice self-selection process because the people who make it to the end of the book are generally speaking the people who liked it. So you get good reviews and it all works out. And so that's the letter at the end of the book, a quality product. And the other thing we do is, of course, we do BookBub, which everyone talks about. Oh, BookBub. But it really is that good. It's really amazing. There is nothing better right now for getting in front of eyeballs. There are lots of other smaller services, and for us, they weren't really worth the time. If you're still kind of building your first, once you get sort of over your first 1,000 or 2,000 or so sales, you start kind of going up exponentially if your books, are really good or not just, it wasn't just like a flash in the pan kind of thing. If you're actually, writing books you really care about, and you start getting over, 100, then 200, then 1,000, then 2,000 sales, things start going up exponentially. But those first 100 sales are really hard to get. You have to almost hand sell the thing because no one knows who you are. And so if you're still in that stage, then the smaller list, like Fussy Librarian, I know is a very popular one. There's tons of them, but the smaller lists can be very good. It's also good to go on a lot of these lists at the same time because one of the things that we learned at this Romantic Times marketing panel that Travis went to, they took notes for me. Thank you, honey. Is that you have to touch. This is a very well-known marketing phenomenon. You have to touch someone 7 or 8 times before your product starts feeling familiar. So you don't just want to hit them with marketing once in one way. You want to hit them. You want them to see you in their email. You want them to see you on Facebook. You want them to see you anywhere you can see them, to touch them as many times as possible. And the more times you touch them, the more times they see your cover or see you on a blog or see you somewhere, the more likely they are to feel familiar with you and to actually buy your book.
Yeah, quite a traditional old thing, isn't it? The 7 steps of selling, the first touch through
exactly.
to
And you
sale.
know, just because we're in this Wild West frontier doesn't mean the old tricks don't work. Everything old is new again.
Yeah, conventional
out here.
wisdom. Rachel, that's absolutely brilliant and so much to take away, I think, particularly for me and I know for our audience. And I really loved because it resonated very much with what Mark says when you talk about looking professional, setting high standards, being indistinguishable from traditionally published. In fact, frankly, looking better than traditional published, because when they start advertising and doing some of the things that we do, they don't do it very well. So actually,
they do not.
Yeah,
they could take a lesson from some indies. And I think a lot of the big houses are starting to do that.
Yeah, I think they are as well. So that's great. Thank you so much indeed for joining us from north of Disney. I think I'm north of Disney World as well.
I think half the world is north of Disney World.
Yeah, but we're very happy to talk to people south of Disney World as well, we should say.
Absolutely. Wherever in relation to Disney World you are,
East, west,
we're happy to talk to you.
Or in Orlando. Thank you so much, Rachel, Aaron, Bark, your various author names, and people will find you at rachelaaron.net.
That is correct. rachelaaron.net. There's the link to the blog is up at the top. Just click it takes you to my blog. Everything is organized by writing, business, whatever you want. Click the tag. It'll take you right to it.
Rachel Aaron, full of energy, full of American sunshine, and what a good system and a good approach. And 2K to 10K is how she pronounces the book. I think I rather cumbersomely said 2,000 to 10,000 because I'm British. What an interesting approach. Mark, do you think you're going to take anything on board from that? I guess, so you said earlier before we started the interview that 2,000 words a day is going to suit you, but you've got to remember you've got a good series behind you, good box sets behind you, and you're adding to that. There are lots of people out there who are just coming towards the end of their first novel, and they are painfully aware that they really want 2, 3, 4 novels to get their business up and running. And for them, that could be a really important step towards that.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing for me is that it took me 2 years to write the first self-published book that I put out 5 or 6 years ago, The Black Mile. And I'm obviously a lot quicker than that these days, even though I may have slowed the pace a little touch. But it's just the benefit of experience. I know the time of day that I'm best suited to writing. I've got systems in place that enable me to write reasonably quickly. So it's not really, systems are great, and I think most writers will get a lot out of that interview. But it's one of the things that I take away from it is just take the things that suit you and then put them together in a combination that suits you best. So that is what I'll do, and I'll look at that. I'm interested in things like kind of eliminating distractions at the moment. So I tend to find the newest shiny thing tends to interest me, and the internet is pretty tempting, especially when you've got closed seasons, cricket's going on. I know you're following that, James, at the moment. And there's lots of things that can distract you. So it is a question of getting a system and then devoting yourself to it, and to the exclusion of all those tempting distractions that can take our focus away.
Are you still using that mystic whale music in your ears?
I do, yeah, Brain FM. I use it now and again, so I'll do like a 30-minute session.
I find mystic whale in your music.
Oh my god, that's my what's it called?
That's
Siri.
Siri.
Siri woke up. What did I say?
Siri doesn't know what mystic brain music is.
I do not know what mystic music is. Anyway,
yes, I am still using Mystic Brain music, James. Brain FM, you can set it to 30-minute or an hour, and then just basically use that almost like a Pomodoro technique. So you just kind of focus on that for half an hour, and then take a 10-minute break, go for a walk, stretch your legs, watch the cricket if it's you, and in fact if it's me, and then do another half hour.
Well, I always invite you to the cricket, don't I? Because I have a friend with a similar email address to you, and you frequently get strange invites to go watch Test matches.
Well, we have the same first name. I'm not sure. I think that's about as similar as it gets.
I only ever type Mark into my email program and then hit return and get on with it. Look, before we go, I wanted to point out we have a really super episode next week for Facebook advertising in particular. It's a man called Deepesh Mandalia, I should say. And he is a real guru when it comes to social media advertising, particularly Facebook advertising. He's the guy startup companies bring in to organize their campaigns, to shape, focus, optimize them. And big campaigns, he puts thousands of dollars into them, but he understands how the system works. And it was a brilliant interview. We had a few technical issues. There's been a big broadband issue in Britain over the last couple of weeks, but I'm sorting that out. But it's going to be a really useful interview to listen to if you're into social media advertising, particularly Facebook ads. That will be episode 24 next week. But until then, I would say watch some cricket, possibly baseball, and enjoy yourselves and get some of that writing done.
Bye, Siri. Bye, James.
You've been listening to the Self-Publishing Formula podcast. Visit us at selfpublishingformula.com for more information, show notes, and links on today's topics. You can also sign up for our free video series on using Facebook ads to grow your mailing list. If you've enjoyed the show, please consider leaving us a review on iTunes. We'll see you next time.